And thank you so much, Emily. Like Emily said, this is a series, so we're going to be talking today about building the understanding for the purpose and need for these within your school, your district, kind of however you may be with your roles, and then moving on to really the meet and greet, or the meaty part of like how to create them in Eduphoria in that next one. And let me get started. Today we're going to look at kind of why we should use these, why they're beneficial, what they are, and that's kind of, we're going to look at TEA's definition and also kind of how that connects to Eduphoria, who's eligible to receive these, again, looking at kind of TEA's guidelines there, steps for getting started in your own district or on your own campus, and then looking ahead at that next series. This is me. Since you can't really see me today, I wanted to give a couple like little, so you can put a picture to the voice kind of thing. That always helps me. I'm in my 12th year of education right now. And I was a secondary history teacher, then an instructional coach for all contents at the secondary level. And then I became an assessment specialist. This is my 4th year in this position. This position has changed a lot, going from my first year where it was just kind of like, hey, we could do Eduphoria online tests, to this year where it's just, as you all know, we're moving to completely online, and how that looks not only at a state level in our state testing, but on our kind of district and school level testing with Eduphoria. Tara and Emily are both here with me today to kind of be my helpers and kind of help guide me along. They have been kind of like holding my hand through the whole process, so they're wonderful, and I want to thank them. And then we're going to kind of start off with a temperature check. So in the chat, kind of just share a comment of something maybe that you already know about content and language supports, or if you're like a lot of people in my district and you really didn't have an idea of what those were, what are your current thoughts about assessments? Kind of the way it's moving, the way we've seen it move over the last few years, the way we know it's going to be moving next year. What are your current kind of thoughts and feedbacks? Are you worried about online? Are you excited for it? Where are you kind of right now? I'm going to give you about a minute and a half, so only 90 seconds, just to kind of submit that to the chat and just kind of get us started, so we can kind of take a check on that.
All right, so it's cool that a lot of you are excited about them and aware and have been using them. That's exciting. Love hearing that.
I do too, and I love, somebody commented that online is the future, and I kind of really love that, because it is, to me, it's an inevitable. It's something that we can't just kind of kick the can down the road any longer. So it's kind of, how do we make the best of this for those kids? And, one of the things that I talk to teachers and our instructional coaches and APs about a lot in our district is, my goal is not that when we go completely, we've gone partially online in our district. When we go completely online, my goal is that the first time a student sees an online test is not when they sit down to take the STAAR. And I think that, just having those transition pieces, moving into that, I feel like these content supports really flow with that kind of transition piece with that, to looking at that and looking at how we do online. I think a lot of us, as if your parents especially, have seen that our kids either did well or struggled or had kind of some different gaps when they looked at it in the last, year and a half when they were doing it from home. I know my now 3rd grader definitely did. He had some adjustments he had to make. So I think that's also kind of a piece. So the next one that I kind of want to share with you guys, and this is one of my, I call it my education go-to picture, is how do you feel like this image could connect to testing? And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to drop any thoughts you have in the chat. And I'm going to share with you how I explain it to teachers, because this has kind of been my go-to image for these trainings. I love the question. Somebody put in there that they don't know where to stop with the supports. Like, where are the levels of those support? I think that's a really powerful point to kind of bring up as well. So some really great points in here. I love the equity versus equality. Those are some of my favorites. When I was an instructional coach, I always used this image to talk about accessibility, and talking about how in teaching, the idea is we remove all barriers to the content, and they can kind of access the content where they are. So they don't have to have those supports if they can access the content where they are. But I also tell them for this training that I live in assessment world now, and I cannot take down the STAAR wall. I can't make it go away. I can't make it just, stop. Even if and we all know this, if we stop STAAR, we would do a different type of state testing or federal testing, whichever where we are. And so I kind of told them that, you know, within the assessment world, I live in these two pictures. And what we realized was that our district lived here. And these content were kind of the step that we could see to moving to that second picture. They were that step to equity that we were missing. And that's kind of where we started. When we're kind of getting into why do we use these, when you're talking to those stakeholders, and we'll talk about who that is later on, but just the why behind it. I always like to start with the why. And to me, the why is this little meme that one of my APs sent me. If we differentiate lessons, why do we give standardized tests? She said that she'd seen that across teachers' Facebooks and Instagrams and Twitters for years. And that's really kind of, it hit home to me because the idea behind this is how you can differentiate test. We've taught that, you know, scaffolding differentiation is the best practice in education. We know that kids learn in different ways, have different abilities, and then we all hand them the same paper test. You know, I tell my teachers, like, I see these, you know, good teachers differentiate. We know that great teachers are in our schools and in our districts. And then we all hand them the same paper test. And I told them, I said, it used to frustrate me so much because you'd have that kid that could talk to you and could do your projects and, you know, write a paper about stuff. And you could see that they had some level of understanding, but it just didn't show up when they would test. And so it was always frustrating for me in the classroom. And so now seeing this as that way that we can differentiate and scaffold that content for those students that could benefit from it is so powerful and such like a why not kind of thing. Like, why wouldn't we? We know that this is what's best for kids. We know we want to do what's best for kids. So this is what we do. And this is kind of why we're in education. So the next kind of piece of where to start is there are things, and I said 3, and I apologize, I added one more in there, is what are they? Who's eligible? How does it work for their content? How do you make it work in Eduphoria? We are going to look a little bit into that content piece today. We're going to look really more on the Eduphoria on that next one in the December webinar. We're going to talk really in depthly about what they are and who is eligible. Because one thing that we've done is when we looked at what they are, we started by reaching out. I wanted somebody to come in and do this. I wanted somebody to come train me on where do I put them? What are they? What do they look like? How can I make that work in Eduphoria? And there just wasn't anyone. We contacted some different districts. We had a couple of districts, Pflugerville, if I have anybody from Pflugerville, was super helpful with how they shared, how they created separate assessments to build in some of these supports, even before Eduphoria had the capability. And we had a couple of different conversations with them just about how'd you get started? How did they incorporate their teachers or their instructional coaches or their content coordinators or their SPED people within this whole process? The problem was that it just didn't exist in the way that we kind of needed this training to be. We were told from TEA that they had internal trainings, but they weren't offered and they weren't applicable, or we couldn't access them at our level. And so we kind of set out and said, we have to create something. And so I just kind of dove in deep and I started this process last spring. And I started really understanding what they are, where they happen, and kind of looking at those trends across the contents. So the TEA definition of them is that they are designated supports that allow for various types of assistance. Very broad. And if you've ever looked at these on the practice test, you know they are very broad. There are 3 different types. There's pop-ups, rollovers, and pre-reads. And from what I'm hearing from a lot of you, you may already know a lot of this. So this may be a little bit of just a review for you. The pop-ups are the most common on the TA assessments. They're used in every different content. They include things like images, visual representations, clarifying words, or even pulling up reference materials like formulas or the periodic table. And they're very useful. They're very powerfully used. These are just a couple examples of what they look like in Cambium, which is this top example. They're a little different now when we move to Cambium. They're not just the underline anymore. They have the little box around them, which sometimes you can see in this example makes the questions look a little different because they have that box, especially in reading passages. Sometimes they look a little different. And in Eduphoria, they have those little dotted lines. So they look like a pop-up, just like we had seen in the previous with ETS. I just put this in here so that you guys, when you're done with the webinar, can come back and look at this. This has become like a really useful go-to guide for my teachers when they want to pull these into their classrooms. This is TEA's overall guideline for pop-ups, and I never go through it. To me, like, I have those PowerPoint rules in the back of my head, and it's way too much text on one slide, but I just wanted to offer them. So if you haven't seen this before, these are these kind of guidelines that TEA has set up. The rollovers, which are my personal favorite, are these kind of really powerful things that change what a question looks like. They bullet or separate steps in a process. They're dominantly used in math. They also reword complex questions or answer choices. And you see that a little in science and ELAR. And they reorganize historical excerpts. So if you have smaller excerpts, like this example here from the 13th Amendment, they will completely change what that excerpt looks like, which is so powerful to those students. Because if you've ever seen the 8th grader US history test, they are a reading test in and of themselves. It's a really kind of powerful tool within those. Pre-reads, which are kind of my other favorite, are only ELAR. They are on reading and editing sections. They used to be on revising as well, but now they're just reading and editing. We haven't been told that that's going to change. So that's kind of what we've gone with. And they are really like a summarizing paragraph of the entire thing the student is about to read. And if they have content language supports and oral accommodations, they are read to them. So I can't have the passage read to me, but this whole paragraph summing it up is read to me before I even look at the passage. And to me, that's so powerful for those kids with reading comprehension issues, with just reading issues and having any struggles with reading, to have that kind of information just already preloaded into your head right before you start. You kind of have that background information given to you before you kind of get going is just super powerful. So I think that I love the pre-reads. To me, they were a big game changer kind of moment. I wanted to give one thing that we've noticed across, and I'm going to share with you guys some trends that we did. I've gone through 17, 18, and 19 of TEA's examples, and that's kind of where I started. I just dove in and just went and looked at every example that they have when they had it in ETS and now in Cambium. And so I wanted to kind of just show a couple examples of what we've seen in some of these contents real quick. So if you haven't seen these before, they can be really useful to kind of look at as we move through. So for math, this is just a math question I'm taking in Cambium for a test here, and I tried to mix it up with some elementary and secondary examples. I think this one was from like a 5th grade example. If I have those supports, I'm going to have pop-ups there. My pop-ups in math are so useful and powerful because a lot of times they give those visual representations where they put this in a chart, and it helps that student understand and make sense of what they're seeing there. This is another math one. And I love this one because this is one thing that's kind of harder to do when you're looking at it for an Eduphoria that I've had to work in there. But when they have those, this one has the rollover. So it has that little tiny arrow, which is so, sometimes it's a little bit easier to see in Cambium, I feel like, than it was in ETS. But they'll have that where it kind of scaffolds it and reorganizes it and simplifies the question. And then they'll still have like built-in pop-ups within their rollovers, which is really powerful. And the next webinar, I'll show you guys kind of what I do with these when I have, because my goal in my Eduphoria assessments is to get them as comparable to Cambium and the state testing that they're going to see in Eduphoria. And I'll show you guys kind of how I deal with these kind of unique scenarios that happen in math and science, usually for the most part, where they have the rollover and a pop-up, because they're kind of a little beast in of themselves. But it's still these huge supports that are built in within that. This is an ELAR example. This one I want to say was secondary. I want to say it was like an English 1 example. And so you see here, this is a writing piece. You can see that by the numbering of those passages. And that's with just, so this would have been like an editing passage. And this is just what they usually see versus the pre-read that really kind of, like I said, summarizes what they're about to read. When we had teachers that realized that that could be read to them, I mean, that was such a huge kind of aha moment for those teachers. I don't know about your schools, but in our district, we really have a lot of pushback from math and ELAR the most about going online. They want to have that piece, that summary right in front of them so they can do annotations, or they want to have a piece of paper to work out the problems. So seeing some of these supports were so powerful. These are my favorite, like my absolute favorite supports are these editing and revising supports that take, I think because as a kid, this was always a hard one for me when they're trying to change that sentence and you have to think about what that sentence is in your head. And they just tell you, like, here's what the sentence would look like with this change. And it just pops up. To me, that was such a huge moment to see that those kids could have that support. This is, again, another ELAR one that I like to always point out when they utilize those entire paragraphs, showing them where that could go, where they pull up those paragraphs. And again, if I'm a student that has these content language supports and text to speech, this is read to me. So the passage may not have been read to me, but these are going to be read to me. Editing ones are not. But if this question that we just looked at was, in a revising passage, that's read to them, that whole thing. So it's, I think, a really powerful part as well. This is another example of a reading passage. I liked this one because you're going to see kind of not only the pre-read, that again summarizes that whole thing, but you're going to see all the pop-ups within them as well. So just within this pop-up, and one of the really powerful trends that we've noticed across ELAR is that within these reading passages, when they have something like this, everything still makes sense. And I think that's a really powerful point to kind of point out when you're creating them yourself, is that when you're looking at a reading passage, whether it be a TEA example, or it's something from your own curriculum, or it's something from like one of the item banks in Eduphoria, the sentence still needs to make sense. So for example, on this one, it says, it gradually becomes clear you won't be starting in Game 7 of the World Series and tipping your cap after hitting a walk-off homer. And it changes it to, you won't be playing in the championship and winning. It still makes sense that if that student rereads that sentence with the built-in support, it still makes sense. I will tell you the one kind of hiccup, and I just had this conversation with Emily with the pre-reads, is that right now, and I'm in Eduphoria, and I have to give a little shout out to Emily too, because I begged for 2 years for Emily to make it where resources could be read or not read for science and social studies specifically, but for things like your revising passages. I begged for questions to be able to be read or not read. And they've made it happen. Like, you can do that now. I was so excited. I did like my happy dance when Emily told me about that. But the pre-reads are still kind of a hard piece. Because if I have a reading passage that I don't want to be read to them, but I want to provide a pre-read, how do I do that? And I will tell you the way I've worked around this, and I'll show you guys how I did this in that next webinar, is I record some of them. So I record myself on some of them and build that in. And I'll show you guys kind of how I do that in that next webinar, because that is one kind of hiccup of making sure you get those kind of like experiences built into your same test that you're making. And to me, that's a really important piece. This is another ELAR one that I wanted to kind of pull up, where they have the rollovers as well as those pop-ups. And this one, you can see it's going to change the answer choice here. And then the pop-up here is like the humble would be simple. So again, it still makes sense with that content that you're reading. I had a elementary ELAR teacher, and this was her kind of aha moment. So I wanted to share it. When we have these questions, especially reading questions, that say something about the paragraphs, it will pop up those paragraphs or the paragraph. And again, if I have both, it will read it to me. So I had a teacher that, I don't know if she was an aha moment or if she was just kind of angry, where she was like, no, I teach them that it won't read it to them. And I was like, that's great, but it will. It will if they have these supports, and it will in these some ways. So this is kind of a piece, like maybe we shouldn't, how does this impact our classroom? They are going to have some of these read to them. If they're built into those questions and they have that support, it is read to them. So maybe we change how we, teach them when it comes to those reading passages. Maybe we give them an option where some of them are able to listen to certain pieces read to them, just different things, or have those conversations with your teachers. And how does this impact their actual teaching as well? So in this one, I kind of wanted to show you guys, and let me actually go back here. This is a science example. This one is from bio. So this is a bio example. And in this one, I liked that when I had those pop-ups, not only do I have a rollover option, but I have pop-ups in my table, and I have pop-ups in my answer choices. This one is a unique one, because a lot of times when you have those pop-ups in your tables, you'll have some different kind of, like they'll be similar to what your answer choice is. And in this specific one, you can see it kind of did the same thing we saw in the math example with the rollover. So it changes it and simplifies it, breaks it down with those bullets. My pop-ups for my table had images, so a picture of what gold looks like. Whereas in my answer choices, it took the same table they'd seen and kind of isolated that information. I've also seen it where they'll do this example and they won't even list the other ones. It will just isolate what this was like. It would just have gold listed. So I've seen it in both ways on that from TEA. But these are just kind of, like I said, examples with this. I always, when I'm talking to teachers, use food webs, because they have food webs on 5th grade, 8th grade, and bio. Every year there's a food web question, I promise you. And I love that within these supports like this right here, does anyone know what a hognose snake is? I do not know. But if I have these supports, I'm going to find out because it gets a picture. So there's not an already, if you've looked at these past tests, which I'm sure you have, sometimes they'll have images of the animals. Sometimes they don't. If I have these supports, I'm going to see them either way. The other thing that I really love they do with these food web ones is this right here. I remember when we had to give the 8th grade STAAR and I was in secondary, and we had to do bio when I was an instructional coach. And you always see students that are on their page trying to connect the dots when it comes to these food webs and trying to see, like, is this a connection? This provides that visual for them in a really obvious way, where it either, a lot of times I've seen it where they'll kind of embolden these or they'll kind of gray out the others as well. But it just kind of provides that added visual that's like a second visual to them that is so powerful, and they're answering those questions. So if you know me, you know that I do love some social studies. So I wanted to show a couple ones here. We're going to have pop-ups, but we're also going to have a rollover here. So you can see the pop-up here, like for barbed wire as an image. The other one was like for protecting the crops. And you can see it went from protecting crops from damage caused by animals to protecting crops from animals that would destroy them. Again, this was the same example I showed you guys earlier with the rollovers. This is my kind of question with my supports built in. You can see the 13th Amendment, of course, is directly quoted from the Constitution. So it's not in user-friendly language because really nothing in the historical excerpts is. But if it's a short enough one, they will reword it to make it more user-friendly, more simple, more, taking those complex words and kind of simplifying them. If it's a long excerpt, they usually build in pop-ups throughout the excerpt. So there's kind of a difference there in how they handle some of the history pieces. So before I jump into who's eligible, Emily, do we have anything that we need to kind of answer or go over from the chat or from the Q&A?
I think we have answered most of the questions as they have come in. A lot of people did not realize that text-to-speech was customizable. That was released last week at TAC. What I mean by that specifically is you can decide if a passage is read out loud or if it is not read out loud. You can decide if a question is read out loud and if answer choices are read out loud. So just as a little added piece, if you do want that pre-read that she was referring to is so valuable, she's recording it, but you could separate it out as an additional resource, turn on the reading ability for that element and turn it off for the passage. So you do have some options for moving forward and allowing your kids to have those supports at a very customizable level at this point. So,
and there are, in our next webinar, I'm going to show you guys some ideas with not only the pre-reads and how we're kind of changing those up now that we have that customizable tool, but also like your tables for science, your maps and social studies that, they just used to be a beast and you had to just use alternative text or just use certain things. There's so much kind of more options now that they have that customizable piece, and you can pull those in as resources that just weren't there before. So we'll definitely be looking at that in that next webinar as well. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically with content as well. And I have my contact information too. So if you have any questions as well, or you can't make the next one and stuff, we can sign you up and link you up through Emily and Tara as well. So one question that I initially got from everybody, as soon as I was like, look how great these are, I drank the Kool-Aid, was who can get them? One of the biggest things that I kind of wanted to share with you guys is identifying who can get them and identifying what that means for your district. So TEA, again, has a very broad definition of who can get them. Pretty much for an English test, a student that is code 504, emerging bilingual, or SPED can receive these supports. There's not a second qualifier on that piece. We've had a ton of questions of, well, what if they're coded SPED for this or 504 for this? Like, there's not another qualifier on that level. So that's where it comes in that conversation, those committees of would this kid benefit from this or not? The idea, of course, in everything that you see in support for TEA is that the students routinely, effectively using this in classroom instruction and testing. The way I told these teachers was they're probably already using this in your instruction because you are probably already differentiating for those students. You're providing word banks, you're providing images, you have these built in. There wasn't a way we could provide them in our district on testing before this. And that was kind of the big change. If you're taking a Spanish test, if you're in elementary and you have emerging bilinguals that are taking Spanish tests, they can receive these supports through 504 ARD. They are built into the Spanish test, and you can see some examples of that. I know the 2019 STAAR examples had built in for most of the part. I think they missed one reading passage because we kind of reached out for them. And I'm assuming their 21 or 2021 have them as well. I haven't gotten through all of the 2021 yet. But you can look at some of those supports as well. This is one of the reports that I think is a super powerful report that a lot of people don't realize is there in Eduphoria. If you have campus-wide access, so for us, it was our admin teams and our instructional coaches, you can do a report called the Student Supports Report. Say it like 10 times fast and you'll, I promise, stumble. And this tells you what the kids are receiving in your school. I highly recommend you do it in an Excel file, because in the Excel file, you can sort it by, it's going to alphabetize the whole school or the whole kind of number of kids, whoever's in your school that's receiving these supports. So if you put it in Excel, you can sort it by their grade level, then do it by their name and do all the fun data views that we all love to do in Excel, and see who has this support. We have a little over 24,000 students in our district. We pulled these reports across our district. We had over 11,000 students that were eligible to receive these supports. Of that, 28% were receiving them overall. In elementary, especially in our math in elementary, that number was in the teens. Like 13% were receiving it on fourth grade math. We had two Spanish students that were taking Spanish tests that were receiving these supports. So our focus this year has been to start with, where are we? And where is that potential to identify those students that we know would benefit from this? We've told our teachers that our goal by the end of next year, when we're going completely online, is to have that number closer to 75%. Because we know there are some students that are coded 504 or emerging bilinguals that may not need these supports and may not benefit from them. They may not be made for those students, but we know that the majority are and would benefit from them. We know that there's a lot more than 28% that would. So the first step when you're looking at that eligibility is to really identify where you are currently. Maybe you're rocking it and you already have that 75% and you're like, okay, we just need to, share the love and get it out there. But if you're kind of where we are, where not enough teachers knew what these were, knew how powerful they were, knew the options that we would have now in Eduphoria, and really wanted that piece of paper in their hands. And so they hadn't identified them. Even in that switch where we did in our district to the secondary first to go online, it still wasn't being fully identified. So really starting with, where are you and where is your school or where is your district, to figure out kind of where that is. And that's a report from Eduphoria is a great place to start.
And if you're okay with it, Kim, I was going to add in too, we have the option as well for you to drag the fields of the student supports into a data view and actually see if students utilize them. So it's one thing to know that they're enabled. That's extremely powerful. I love the data you just rattled off, Kim. That really made me happy. That was exciting. But also to know, are they utilizing them? Because then that brings you into another conversation. We've turned this feature on for you. We want to make sure you're successful. Please be sure to utilize it. And I have yet to see a competitor that allows you to evaluate whether your students are using that support. So
I will tell you, kind of speaking on that one, Emily, I did a training through a region center about 6 months ago, specifically for the content language supports. And we looked specifically at math. And they wanted examples in, I think I did DMAC, Eduphoria, Schoology, and Canva. And none of them were as good as Eduphoria. Pretty much in all of those kind of aha pieces on those was that you had to make a separate test. You couldn't use the same test for all your populations in those other systems. Eduphoria was the only one that we could create the same test and build in these supports where students received the level of support they needed in a way that was user-friendly, in a way that, helped the teachers where they don't have to look at 10 views of data. They can look at one place and had those kind of features built in it with it. I'm getting some great ahas. There's a couple of questions, and I don't know if y'all have seen these. For that report, if you go to your Analyze tab and you go to that very bottom in Aware, you have a reports right there kind of button, and that's where you should see that report. I love the aha of kind of looking at where is my district or where is my school in terms of how many kids have these supports or are utilizing them. I will tell you that so far our numbers in our district of utilizing these supports have been about comparable to what we had in kids that were receiving them. To start, we just did our first round of district testing in October, and we'll do partially another round in December. So we're kind of waiting to see if that just increases over the year, which is kind of our goal. So the next piece is kind of like, we know what they are, we know who they're for, where do we go from here? So the first thing to kind of realize here is to look at who your stakeholders are. With us, we started with our content specialist. I had to kind of get a little buy-in from them before we went out and big. We work with a team of content specialists in the summer that come in and kind of evaluate our assessments in our district at our district level. They also evaluate teacher resources and different pieces like that. So we kind of presented and started with them. They were my first kind of group. From them, we did the SPED team. We have a team of like instructional coaches that work with our SPED teachers. We pulled in all of them. We pulled in our APs that work with 504, as well as like our dyslexia teachers, our bilingual departments. We also have bilingual teachers and instructional coaches. We pulled all of them in, and we did separate trainings by those groups to talk about how it benefits specific groups of kids and how these kind of can be utilized. Once we really got more buy-in and push from those groups, and we looked at instructional coaches as well, and that is where the kind of people that were our not super buying in our content specialists and our district personnel higher ups started getting more interested. Like I had to do 3 different sessions for one of our content teams, because at first they kind of, listened because we had asked them to come. And then by that third one, they were like, we are having questions from teachers we can't answer about the content supports. And so we kind of had to do more, just reiterate those trainings. We reached out to principals and assistant principals at different trainings and really gave them all the same training of just what they are, how we're going to build them into our testing, who they're for, and how we could, support them and they could support us in this kind of process. And then our last kind of group that we sent out, we did videos and one-pagers to parents and to students. We supplied one-pagers to our meetings and our facilitators that really just give parents some visuals of what these are. We also did little packets for those that had more examples and more visuals that they could utilize in some of their ARD meetings and some of their 504 meetings when they're trying to explain to a parent kind of that they want to give this to their students. We did presentations, trainings. We've created anchor charts for teachers over just things like common content clarifiers we've seen throughout the kind of looking at the years that we've done. And we did those kind of one-pagers and packets as well. So we kind of try to spread the love when it comes to the stakeholders, but make sure we hit people where they were. And it did have to be timely. We had a ton of trainings over the summer that were sparsely attended. We did a couple trainings during the beginning of the school year, especially with those instructional coaches, APs, and principals. But it's really been like in the last month that they have just been begging us to come talk directly to teachers, that I've done Zooms, recorded Zooms, videos, where it's, now that we're really getting into the school year, we're starting doing testing, they want more kind of spread to their teachers and spread throughout. So that's kind of where we've seen it. So not only kind of being prepared for that, but just kind of also being flexible at your timing as well. I'm going to share with you a couple of our trends before we kind of wrap it up that we've seen overall. So this is something I told you guys I have a specialized version of these trainings by content, because I feel like if I'm talking to teachers, that's where the power is if I can tell them how it affects their specific content. So in math, 80 to 85% of the questions are going to have supports. And that's just an overall, when we looked at the years we have and the kind of the data that we have, the number of questions on a math test versus like the number of ones that have supports. Rollovers are the most common in math. Images are used through pop-ups specifically on experiences and items. You saw the glue stick. If they do things like a carnival, a concert, kind of things like that, I asked for a definition on how they choose to do an image in a math question. And the woman I talked with at TEA did not give me an answer. she wasn't. She was like, yeah, I know we have a training, but I'm not really sure how that's decided. But one thing that I've seen that's very common is that it's very much on experiences that if you look at where you live, your kid, like the average kid may not have. So like going to a concert, if it's talking about a concert venue, or going to a carnival, like maybe they've seen them, but maybe they don't know what it's called, or if it's a different word for something. Sometimes like I saw one math question on like a 5th grade math that had a beach and it didn't have a picture, but on a 6th grade math that talked about like the shoreline, it had a picture. So like it also may be the language as well. So it's something to kind of look at. They always connect the reference charts. Like I told our math specialist, I was like, at this point, I don't even know why we're giving out copies of it. Like they are always going to pop up. If they have a formula for area or slope or anything that's like that, they're going to have a pop up there for that. And they're going to provide that formula for volume. I mean, anything that they have built in on those. Excuse me. And they're going to have common language. For example, my favorite one for math is that anytime it says shaded, like the area that's shaded in this diagram, from 3rd grade through algebra, the pop-up is going to say colored in. And it's going to be the same from 3rd grade through algebra. So they have common language throughout those that we've noticed with those trends. And that's a really good place to start too. And we'll look at that in the next webinar. I have some charts that we've created that I'm going to share with you all in the next webinar that really shows you what the trends that we've noticed so far across these that we've kind of created and made into anchor charts for some of our teachers. For ELAR, 85 to 90% of test questions have supports built in. Pre-reads, again, are that big game changer in ELAR, as well as images. And if you've looked at the TA examples, one of my favorite things that they can do, and I have not figured this one out in Eduphoria. So Emily, if you have a tip, you let me know. But they do little videos. Like if it has something about like they packed the sand to make a sandcastle, it will show a little like animation of hands packing sand. And they are so neat. And I like, they'll dig a hole. It'll show something digging a hole. It's so interesting how they do that. And I have not quite figured out how to do those in Eduphoria. But they'll also do rollovers and pop-ups that are used throughout their questions and answer choices. Revising and editing pop-ups in their questions are extremely impactful. And again, they have common language in their literary term definition. So if you have a literary term from imagery to theme to simile to metaphor, it's going to be defined, and it's going to be defined the same way if it shows up on 3rd grade as it shows up on English 2. So there's no change in how they define those. And that was a really big kind of piece for our teachers, utilizing the definitions that TEA is providing to those students in their classroom. So that was kind of a piece that we shared with them. Science has 90% or more of test questions that have set test supports are built in. And this one, it kind of varies. Sometimes in 5th grade, it's about 93%, but in bio, it can get up to like 96. So at least 90% usually of test questions have supports. They have pop-ups that are the most common, but they have rollovers. Their images are usually specific to science. Animal images, specifics are referencing back to like a piece of a chart, or if a lot of times in 5th grade, if they'll do like the circuits and they'll have the images within the circuits. So a lot of times their images are not more abstract like math, they're specific to science. Again, their reference charts are always referenced in 8th grade. The pop-ups and the answer choices are the most common in science, happening in answer choices versus the question. And again, in science, we've seen clarifying language and or common language with the clarifying terms as well. And we've seen that again from 5th through bio. So whether it's a 5th grader or bio, they're going to have different ones. Social studies, 95 to 100%. We have looked at multiple social studies tests that there was an 8th grade social studies test. I want to say it's 2018. It might have been 19 that had like 45 questions had supports. Every single question had a support built in somewhere. They'll do rollovers for their excerpt. Sometimes their answer choices, and very rarely will they have a rollover in their question. Usually it's more common to be in an answer choice, and almost if those have the short excerpts, they're almost always going to have a rollover. Their images are much more rare in social studies than in math or in science, and they are specific to those questions. Like you saw the image of barbed wire. They're going to have specifics to that where it's maybe a reference to a specific time period, but it provides an image that kind of shows that clarification for that. Their pop-ups are very useful when it comes to clarifying terms and kind of popping up within their charts and their graphs and things like that. And again, we've seen common language with them from 8th and US history. So we've seen those kind of trends going throughout. Our process, and I kind of talked to you guys a little bit when we started, was we have an assessment process in our district that I created about 2 years ago. And after I did a year of my job and realized we didn't have a process and we needed one, where we have those curriculum writers that come in the summer, review and kind of reassess how we're doing assessments. They give us feedback, they do changes. We have content coordinators that look at that feedback with me. We usually have a meeting around July where we kind of really dive deep in what that looks like and what our assessments are going to look like for the next year. I'll get more into what kind of process we looked at and how we utilize like our spreadsheets into that in the next webinar. In April and May, I just started going crazy with TEA examples. I created PDFs, and I'll share some of those with you in the next webinar as well, of what those supports looked like and looking at them in like an overall way in those tests. Created the trainings, and kind of what we've been doing this year is trying to build capacity with examples, curriculum, and trends within our instructional coaches, our APs, our content specialists, and our master teachers, so that our goal next year moving in is this year we started with just tested areas. We had these examples from TEA. We kind of wanted to start with what we had and build from there. So we had those. If we had content that we were building out within our curriculum, they weren't examples from TEA, then we would kind of build those around utilizing these trends that we were seeing and what we had noticed. Our goal next year and next summer is to spread that to our non-tested areas. So we do district assessments in second grade. We need third and fourth grade science. We need sixth and seventh grade science and social studies, things like that we provide at a district level. But right now we don't have all these built-in supports. So that's kind of our building capacity within your district. Creating the assessments and then utilizing Eduphoria to create those student supports within those assessments. We really had a huge change in Eduphoria to bring in these supports and have this ability to do this. I think that one of our big moments of realization was we had some instructional coaches that were working with us to build that capacity out. And I had done a test creation, which is very similar to what we're going to do in that December meeting on how to do it. And they said, man, it just takes me so much longer to make a test. And I was like, yeah, but it's so much better for those kids. Like, I was like, think about the first year teacher that's like, man, if I differentiate, it's going to take so much longer to plan this. Yeah, it is. It's going to be so much better for your kids. And that's kind of that piece with that. So in our next one, we're going to look at how to create these in Eduphoria. I'm going to share with you guys our trends that we've noticed and we've seen overall. The anchor charts we've created for teachers, as well as the handouts we've created for our meetings, as well as 504 meetings. That kind of goes with that communication tips. And then we're going to pull in some of those reports that we talked about earlier about the usage and how you can see how it's impacting, as well as that editing tool that you can look at to look at growth. So we're going to look at a couple of those in that December one. This is our best practices for December 8th. And then there's my contact information. So if you have any specific questions for me, you can send it to me. And that way we have those as well.
We had a few that came in. Angela had a great question about, will we one day have just the items from the state release questions that have some of these supports built into them?
Oh, and so nice.
Yes. And Angela, we feel you. Boy, do we feel your pain. And so I would like to happily announce that we are scoping out that potential right now. We have developed our own team that is building the STAAR release questions, and we've taken ownership of that as a company. So we are proud to be putting out questions for the new STAAR release from 2021. And of course, like I said, scoping out the potential for us to be able to provide those supports for you for those questions. So we hear you, and we would really like to be able to provide you with that need. Keeping that in mind that would only be STAAR released items. And so there's still a large need for you to apply these instructionally to your own locally created assessments, which is why the information that Kim provided today is just astounding. If we can, I like to be a little obnoxious. The data that she provided and the information, I just feel like it is so very valuable. I mean, even knowing 90% of questions, on social studies have these types of supports within them, that is a great knowledge base to have. And in the next session moving forward, she's going to really show us what those commonalities are, because as you've seen in her data knowledge, she already knows what they look like from 5th grade to 12th grade or whatever the case may be. So if you will, give Kim a shout out in the chat, tell her how amazing she is, because she brings an insane value to being able to share this information with you. I also wanted to honor her little feature request. She slid in there, if you noticed, that she would love for a video to be part of a content clarifier. And I already wrote that down. I have a dry erase board where I keep all these things. And so, Kim, it's on my to-do list. I'll start looking into that and seeing what is needed to provide that support. So we love partnering with each and every one of you as educators, and we pride ourselves in trying to be partners with you and make sure that we have a solution based on your needs. So absolutely. That is one thing we value and love. So shout outs to Kim. Please join us next time. And after the next session, you will get some of these resources that she's mentioning. Shout out. We want you to have all of the information before you get all of the content and the resources. So after the next session will be, she's very, very kindly offered to share these resources that she's compiled together for trends and data aligned to STAAR and content support. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Kim. Amazing. You're getting some great shout outs. I like it. As always, feel free, follow us on our social medias. We're tweeting out. We've already tweeted out how excited we are to be working with Kim and everything. Like last week, we tweeted out about releasing the text-to-speech customization. So make sure you follow us so you can stay up to date with those things. And it's a lot of me sharing them out as I'm excited. So do that as well. And we are thrilled to get to work with you again in December and provide some more information. Thank you again for joining. And after the session, you'll get a video of the content today. Anything else I missed?
I think you got it all. And thank you guys, everybody that attended. I really hope that it was helpful and useful information. Like I said before, I have very much kind of bought into these content language supports. I think they are a really big game changer for kids. And I really look forward to our next session where we can really get into how we create them and the trends that we've seen from TEA to kind of build that and where they go and where you kind of draw that line of like, how much is too much or what do we need to provide? Like, what are those levels? So I think that'll be a great conversation for next month.
Right. Thank you very much.